On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1967. We're going to be taking a look at the Statler Brothers, and they're going to be performing Flowers on the Wall. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, let's get these guys up on screen and see how they get on.
I keep hearing you're concerned about my happiness. All that thought you're giving me is conscience, I guess. If I were walking in your shoes, I wouldn't worry none. While you and your friends are worried about me, I'm having lots of fun. Counting flowers on the wall, that don't bother me at all. Playing solitaire till dawn with the deck of 51. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Now don't tell me I've nothing to do. Last night I dressed in tails, pretended I was on the town. As long as I can dream, it's hard to slow the swinger down. So please don't give a thought to me, I'm really doing fine. You can always find me here, I'm having quite a time. Counting flowers on the wall, that don't bother me at all. Playing solitaire till dawn with the deck of 51. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Now don't tell me I've nothing to do. It's good to see you, I must go, I know I look alright. Anyway, my eyes are not accustomed to this light, and my shoes are not accustomed to this hard concrete. So I must go back to my room and make my day complete. Counting flowers on the wall, that don't bother me at all. Playing solitaire till dawn with the deck of 51. Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Now don't tell me I've nothing to do. Don't tell me I've nothing to do.
And there we have it. This is one of those songs that is interesting from the perspective of the subject matter, because it is about staying at home and counting flowers on the wall, watching TV, playing solitaire, and having a solitary existence, not really going outside. But the performance here, spot on with the harmonies. And just to let you know as well that we've got Lou DeWitt, who wrote this song, on the right hand side playing guitar. And interestingly, the way that the vocal groups used to set up, they would have the tenor on the left-hand side, whereas we've got bass on the left-hand side, talking about vocal ranges here. And the reason that they did this was because, I think Don mentioned it in an interview that I saw, where sometimes Lou with the guitar, when they set up the other way, Don would sometimes get the headstock in his face and in and around his face, which he didn't want when he was singing, so they organised it this way. So it was a different look. Just mentioning Don Reed, and his brother Harold is on the far left in the picture here, and Harold sings bass. That is his range. This is the interesting thing about these guys, is the different ranges that we have that allow the harmonisation in the way that we hear it, because Harold, you can hear that low E coming in right at the bottom of that bass range. But then also let me mention Phil Borsley, who's in between Don and Harold here, because his range will be baritone, which means he's sitting between what we'd have with that bass range and also the tenor range. And the tenor is what Lou is hitting in terms of that vocal range. So we've got such a great spread here. Everybody's voice sits in a different place, and I know that we've probably got a couple of baritone voices in here, but you can still see from the lead vocal that we get from Don that he sits a little bit higher, not quite in that tenor range that Lou's hitting, but it sandwiches itself in there, so you get 4 great voices that all complement each other. So here, because we have the extreme of the bass range compared with the tenor range and everything in between, the options are limitless here from a male vocal range perspective. The other thing about this performance is the way that we get straight into it. Just an F sharp 7th chord, and we are capoed on the 4th fret here, so you can play your standard D7th shape if you want to play along. But we've got the harmony line that comes straight in, effectively a dual lead vocal here. So it means that being on pitch straight off the bat is such a difficult thing to do, but Lou and Don are straight in there. Another thing to look out for just with the rhythm on the guitar here is the way that Lou jumps from that root note of his chord, but then gets into the strumming pattern, but then always comes back to that root. And you can see the way that that right hand is just being ever so slightly manipulated to stop the downstroke on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and with the rest of the emphasis is then allowed to put that rhythm in there. So it means that you always get a driving forward of the sound because you get that root note on each of those beats. We've also got the performance element of looking at the camera and engaging everyone watching this. They know that they've got the audience live at home, and then making that connection with them. And it is something that when you do watch TV show performances, sometimes you can lose that from the performer, but these guys are so well rehearsed, not only vocally, musically, but putting on a show as well. Just putting these vocals under the spotlight to give you an appreciation of the range here, because I do say in other videos about the octave range that if you can get as a singer, it's going to be dramatic and it's going to give you a unique sound, and you'll go on a journey covering that amount of pitch within a composition. But here, with the luxury of 4 great singers, it means that Harold down at the bottom is at E2. It's way down there in the bass range, and you can find that on your keyboard or your guitar. On your guitar it's easy, it's your low E string, but then we've also got the high note of an A sharp 4, and that's Lou who's supplying that, and that is up there in the tenor range, and it is going to be a struggle if you don't have that range in your voice in order to do that consistently and hit those notes. Of course, the misleading thing about this performance is that all of the guys just sing with a smile on their face and they hit these notes effortlessly. Just with reference to the guitar, if you do want to play along with this and you've got your capo on your 4th fret in standard tuning, you'll be looking for a G, an E minor, an A 7th, a D 7th, and also a C thrown in there for the chorus. But the way that this has been composed and the melody of the chorus and also the timing that they deliver is interesting, because we start the chorus as normal, just counting through, and there's a little part, the second part of the chorus, where the vocal comes in on the second beat of the bar. And it might throw you off a little bit, but that's all that's happening. So if you are counting along with the beats and the bars, you can look out for that in the chorus, and then it all aligns itself. But right at the end, getting into that last chorus, because what you want to try and avoid, especially in a song when you're performing live, is dead space when nothing's happening. So before we get into the last verse, if you are counting along with the chorus, you'll find that they come in and Lou comes in with his vocal, and I think Don's harmonizing at the same time, just before 4 of the bar, rather than waiting for the end of that bar to then start on beat 1 of the next bar. They jump in to make sure that there's no dead space. This is the kind of thing that you can do live when you're playing and singing at the same time. You can put in any kind of timing that you want, and in this performance, actually, they leave it a little bit longer than on the original record, because that comes in on 3 for that last verse, and you can count that out if you want to. If it feels like the vocal has come in really quickly and you weren't expecting it, that's why, because you'll subconsciously be waiting for another 2 beats to happen before starting the next bar. I know that this is a short video and performance for tonight, but we are going to cover a little bit of the background just briefly. First of all, the Statler Brothers aren't brothers. We have got Don and Harold, who are brothers that I mentioned earlier, but Also, there's no Statlers in there, and this is something that they came up with just from a box of tissues, which is what I read, that it was just a brand name, and they've joked that they could have been called the Kleenex Brothers. But anyway, they were heavily influenced by gospel music and also the Blackwood Brothers, which were an American Southern gospel quartet, and they said that they just put that gospel sound over the top of country music. They formed the band in 1955 and they just played locally at various churches, and at this time they weren't the Statler Brothers straight away. They were the Four Star Quartet, and then after that the Kingsmen, and unfortunately there was another band who were very popular at the time called the Kingsmen, so that's why they decided to change their name to the Statler Brothers. And it wasn't until 1964 that they got discovered by Johnny Cash, and they ended up singing for Johnny Cash for 8.5 years. They were his backing singers. Due to this association with Johnny Cash, they did release a song called We Got Paid in Cash as a tribute to that relationship, and also they appeared on the Johnny Cash show, which ran between 1969 to 1971, and after this time, because their careers expanded in different directions in the mid-70s, they then left Johnny behind. But just rewinding a little bit, because this song, Flowers on the Wall, in 1966 is when it was released. So this performance is just a year after it was released, and it was a huge hit. But not only that, it was a crossover hit because it got to number 2 in the country charts and it got to number 4 in the mainstream charts. As mentioned earlier, this was written by Lou, but they also had a massive hit in 1970, and that was a song called Bed of Roses, and that was written by Harold. So they also had their videos shown in the 1980s on the Nashville network, and it was also known as TNN. So they got that exposure, such an important thing for the time, getting yourselves on TV, but they had already had huge hits up to that point and wrote the songs themselves. They did make the jump into TV in the 90s because they had their own show called the Statler Brothers Show, which ran from 1991 to 1998, and for every year that it ran, it was the top rated show on the channel. And this is the other thing, that these guys always delivered their performance but also their persona with a light-hearted attitude and elements of comedy in there as well. And this is something that tended to be so common at the time in the 60s and the 70s. You'd have bands that were immensely talented, but they were also funny, and they had these comedic elements to their show, so they were entertaining on so many different levels, and sometimes they were so entertaining that people didn't really appreciate the amount of ability that was the foundation of what they were doing. They've had 4 number 1 hits, which were Do You Know You're My Sunshine, Elizabeth, My Only Love, Too Much on My Heart. They've also won 3 Grammys. They were inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 2007, and the following year they were inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. And just a final stat, that they won the Vocal Group of the Year award at the Country Music Association Awards in 1971, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 79, 80 and 84. So they just totally dominated that category in the decade of the 70s and also got in a couple during the 80s. But it's great to have a look at these guys in full flow here with a stripped back performance, but also it gives you such an appreciation of how they blended their voices, but also the advantage of having those different ranges to get such an interesting sound by putting that interesting gospel and the gospel influence over the top of these country progressions. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!